My name is Diana Foster, and I'm 31 years old. 6 months ago, I stood in my childhood home watching my younger sister announce her engagement to my ex-fiancé, the man who had broken up with me 3 weeks before our wedding, claiming he needed space to figure things out. What neither of them knew was that I had spent those 3 weeks discovering the real reason he left me, gathering evidence of their year-long affair, and uncovering the elaborate scheme they had planned to steal my grandmother's $8 million inheritance. The moment I revealed what I knew, both their faces went from smug satisfaction to pure terror in about 5 seconds. If you're watching this story unfold, drop a comment about where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button, because what happened next proved that sometimes the best revenge is simply letting people think they've won while you quietly prepare to take everything they thought was theirs. But to understand how I got to that moment, standing in the living room where I grew up while my sister tried to steal my entire life, I need to take you back 2 years and show you how I built a relationship with someone I thought I could trust, only to discover that the real betrayal was coming from inside my own family. I grew up in Portland, Oregon, as the older of 2 daughters in what most people would consider a successful, happy family. My father, Richard Foster, was a corporate lawyer who had built a respected practice over 30 years. My mother, Diane, was a former teacher who had transitioned to working as an educational consultant. We lived in a beautiful house in the suburbs, took nice vacations, and from the outside, everything looked perfect. But inside our family, there was always an undercurrent of competition and comparison, and I was usually on the losing end of it. My sister, Natalie, was 3 years younger than me, and from the moment she was born, she was the golden child. She was beautiful, charming, outgoing, and had a way of making people fall in love with her instantly. She was also manipulative, entitled, and had spent our entire childhood getting away with behavior that would have gotten me severely punished. Diana is the responsible one, my mother would say with a sigh that suggested responsibility was a character flaw rather than a virtue. Natalie is the special one. Special meant that Natalie got away with everything. She could skip school and my parents would make excuses for her. She could fail classes and they would hire expensive tutors or pressure teachers to change her grades. She could treat people badly and they would rationalize it as her being spirited or knowing what she wants. Meanwhile, I was held to a completely different standard. I was expected to excel academically, behave perfectly, help around the house, and basically be the model daughter who didn't cause any problems or need any attention. By the time I was in high school, I had learned that my role in the family was to be useful and invisible. I helped Natalie with her homework, covered for her when she snuck out, and generally smoothed over the problems she created. And in return, I got to be the responsible one that everyone could depend on but no one particularly celebrated. The pattern continued into adulthood. I went to a state university on a partial scholarship, worked part-time to cover my expenses, and graduated with a degree in accounting. Natalie went to an expensive private college that my parents paid for completely, changed majors 3 times, and eventually graduated with a degree in communications that she never used professionally. After college, I got a job at a mid-sized accounting firm in Portland where I worked hard and steadily advanced. Natalie bounced between jobs as a social media coordinator, event planner, and boutique manager, never staying anywhere longer than a year and frequently calling our parents for money. "Diana doesn't need help," I overheard my mother tell my father once. "She's always been self-sufficient. Natalie needs more support." Then, 2 years ago, I met James Colton at a friend's wedding. He was handsome, successful, charming, and seemed genuinely interested in me. He was a real estate developer who had built a successful company buying and renovating properties. He made me feel seen and valued in a way I had never experienced in my family. We dated for 6 months before he proposed, and during that time, I fell completely in love with him. The proposal was thoughtful and romantic, a surprise dinner followed by a walk through the park where he got down on one knee. The ring was beautiful, a vintage Art Deco design that showed he had paid attention to my taste. My family's reaction was complicated. My parents seemed pleased but not excited. Natalie had been oddly distant, making polite but lukewarm comments about my engagement and finding excuses not to spend much time with James and me. "I think Natalie's jealous," my best friend Amy had said. I had dismissed it at the time. James and I set our wedding date for 14 months later. We planned a nice wedding, about 150 guests, a historic mansion venue, estimated cost around $60,000. But about 6 months before the wedding, things started to change. James became increasingly distant and preoccupied. He was working longer hours, responding to texts less frequently, and seemed distracted. When I asked if something was wrong, he blamed work stress. The distance continued. He started canceling plans, showing up late, and seeming less engaged. My friends noticed too. Then, 3 weeks before our wedding, James called and asked to meet at a coffee shop. When I arrived, he was already sitting there, looking uncomfortable and avoiding eye contact. "Diana, I need to talk to you about the wedding," he began. "I've been doing a lot of thinking about us, about marriage, about what I want in life, and I've realized that I'm not ready. For this, I need space to figure things out." The words hit me like a physical blow. "Space?" "James, the wedding is in 3 weeks. What do you mean you need space?" "I know the timing is terrible, but I can't marry you if I'm not sure. That wouldn't be fair to either of us." "Not sure about what? About me? About our entire relationship?" "I just need time to think. I'm sorry, Diana, I really am, but I can't go through with the wedding right now." And then he walked out, leaving me sitting alone, trying to process the fact that my fiancé had just broken up with me 3 weeks before our wedding. The next few days were a blur of shock, grief, and humiliation. I had to cancel everything, tell everyone the wedding was off, return gifts, and deal with the practical aftermath while trying to process the emotional devastation. My family's reaction was surprisingly unsupportive. "Well, at least you found out before the wedding," my mother said. "I always thought James was a bit too good to be true," my father added. "Men like that usually have options." The implication that James was too good for me stung deeply. Natalie had been strangely quiet, sending only a brief text saying she was sorry. She hadn't actually called or visited. Amy was my rock through it all, coming over every evening, bringing food, listening to me cry. But about a week after the breakup, everything changed. I was at home going through wedding paperwork when I came across James's laptop. He had left it at my apartment weeks ago and never bothered to get it. I knew I shouldn't, but curiosity got the better of me. I opened it and found he hadn't logged out of his email. What I found was devastating. There, in his sent folder, was a year's worth of emails between James and my sister Natalie. Hundreds of messages that painted a clear picture of a secret relationship that had been going on since shortly after my engagement. The early emails were flirtatious but relatively innocent. Natalie complimenting James, James responding with increasing enthusiasm, both of them establishing a rapport that crossed the line from friendly to inappropriate, but the emails quickly escalated. Within a few months, they were explicitly discussing their attraction to each other, making plans to meet in secret, and strategizing about how to hide their relationship from me. "I feel terrible about this," James had written in one message, "but I can't stop thinking about you. You're everything I thought Diana would be but isn't. You're fun, spontaneous, exciting. Being with you feels like being alive." "I know Diana is my sister," Natalie had replied, "but she's always had everything. The perfect grades, the perfect job, the perfect life. Why shouldn't I have something for once? Besides, you and I have real chemistry. What you have with Diana is just comfortable." The betrayal was staggering. My sister had been actively pursuing my fiancé for over a year, and he had been reciprocating while planning to marry me. But as I continued reading, I discovered something even more disturbing. The affair wasn't just about attraction or chemistry. It was strategic and calculated in ways that made my blood run cold. About 6 months into their affair, the emails shifted to discussing my grandmother's inheritance. My grandmother, Rose Foster, had passed away 4 months before James broke up with me. She had been a successful businesswoman who had built a chain of specialty retail stores over 40 years. When she passed, she left the bulk of her estate, approximately $8 million, to me, with smaller amounts going to Natalie and my parents. Grandma Rose had always had a special relationship with me. Unlike my parents, she had valued my responsibility, my work ethic, and my independence. She had seen me as someone who would use her inheritance wisely. "You're the only one in this family who understands the value of building something yourself," she had told me shortly before she passed. "I know you'll use this money to create something meaningful, not just spend it on status symbols." The inheritance was in a trust that would be fully released to me on my 30th birthday, which was coming up in 2 months. Until then, I had limited access enough for emergencies, but not enough to spend freely. And apparently, James and Natalie had been planning to get their hands on that money. The emails laid out their entire scheme. James would stay engaged to me long enough to get married. Once we were married, he would convince me to invest substantial portions of the inheritance in his real estate development company investments that he would structure in ways that would be very difficult for me to recover if we divorced. Then, after the money was safely under his control, he would leave me for Natalie. "Once we're married and she's invested in my company, the money is as good as mine," James had written. "Community property laws will ensure I keep at least half of it in a divorce, and the business structures will make it hard for her to extract her investments quickly. By the time she figures out what's happening, you and I will be together and financially set for life." "What about the inheritance rules?" Natalie had asked. "I thought trust money stays separate in a divorce." "It does, unless it's been commingled with marital assets," James had explained. "That's why it's important that she invested in joint ventures. Once that money is mixed with our marital property and my business assets, it becomes much harder to separate out. Plus, I'm betting she'll be so heartbroken about the divorce that she won't fight too hard. She's always been the type to just accept things and move on." The calculation and cruelty of their plan took my breath away. They weren't just having an affair, they were plotting to steal my inheritance through a fake marriage designed specifically to give James legal access to my money. But there was more. As I continued reading, I discovered that James had gotten cold feet about the plan. He had realized that marrying me and then divorcing me would be complicated, expensive, and risky. There was a chance I would fight back, that lawyers would uncover the scheme. So he and Natalie had devised an alternative strategy: break up with me right before the wedding, causing maximum emotional devastation, and then have Natalie comfort me through the heartbreak while positioning herself to eventually inherit more of the family wealth. "If I break up with her close enough to the wedding, she'll be too devastated to think clearly," James had written. "She'll probably make poor financial decisions out of emotion. Maybe she'll even turn to you for support, and you can position yourself as the better sister. Then, when your parents eventually pass, you'll have demonstrated that you're more deserving of a larger share of their estate. Plus," Natalie had added, "if Diana is single and miserable while I'm happily partnered with her ex-fiancé, it will be easier to convince our parents that I need more financial support. They already favor me anyway. This just reinforces the dynamic." The final emails were about timing the revelation of their relationship. They had decided to wait about 6 months after the breakup to go public, allowing enough time for it not to seem immediately suspicious, but not so long that the dramatic impact would be lost. "I want Diana to see us together," Natalie had written in one of the last messages I read. "I want her to know that I won. She's always been the responsible one, the successful one, the one who does everything right. I want her to see that none of that matters. I can take anything I want from her, including the man she loved." The cruelty of that statement, the deliberate desire to hurt me, not out of passion but out of pure malice, was the moment I decided I wasn't going to be a victim in this story anymore. I spent the rest of that night reading through every email, every text message I could find, every piece of evidence that documented their affair and their scheme. I took screenshots of everything, backed them up to multiple secure locations, and began formulating a plan. By the time the sun came up, I had transformed from a broken-hearted woman into someone with a very clear mission. I was going to make sure James and Natalie got exactly what they deserved. But first, I needed help. The kind of revenge I was planning would require legal expertise, strategic thinking, and perfect timing. The next morning, I called Amy and asked her to come over immediately. When she arrived and I showed her what I had discovered, her reaction was exactly what I needed. "Oh my God," she had said, reading through the emails with increasing horror. "Diana, this is insane. Your own sister was plotting to steal from you, and James was going to marry you just to get access to your inheritance." "I know," I had replied, feeling strangely calm now that I had a plan. "And I'm going to make sure they both pay for it." "What are you thinking?" Amy had asked. "I'm thinking I need a really good lawyer, and I need to make sure Grandma Rose's inheritance is protected before either of them can touch it." That afternoon, I met with Jonathan Martinez, an attorney who specialized in trusts, estates, and family law. When I explained my situation and showed him the evidence, his eyes widened. "Ms. Foster, what your sister and ex-fiancé were planning could constitute fraud, conspiracy, and potentially several other charges," he said after reviewing the emails. "This is serious." "I don't want to press criminal charges," I told him. "At least not yet. What I want is to make sure they can never touch my inheritance, and I want to expose what they did in a way that has maximum impact on their lives." Jonathan smiled grimly. "I think we can arrange that. First, let's make sure your grandmother's trust is absolutely bulletproof. Then we'll discuss your other options." Over the next 2 weeks, Jonathan and I worked on strengthening the trust that held my inheritance. We added additional protections, established clear documentation that the funds were separate property that could never be commingled with marital assets, and created legal barriers that would prevent anyone from accessing the money, except me. If you had married James and he had convinced you to invest in his company, this would have been much more complicated, Jonathan explained. But since the marriage didn't happen, we can protect everything now. We also discussed what legal recourse I had. The scheme they had planned was potentially actionable, but proving intent to defraud would be difficult since the marriage had never actually taken place. "The emails are damning," Jonathan said, "but they mostly show intent rather than actual fraud. You could pursue a civil case, but it might be expensive and emotionally draining, and the outcome isn't guaranteed." "What if I don't care about winning a lawsuit?" I asked. "What if I just want to destroy their reputations and make sure everyone knows what they tried to do?" Jonathan leaned back, studying me carefully. "There are ways to accomplish that, but you need to be very careful about how you proceed. Defamation laws protect people from false accusations, but they don't protect people from the truth." We spent another hour discussing strategies for exposing James and Natalie in ways that would be legally safe but socially devastating. By the time I left Jonathan's office, I had a complete plan, but I needed one more thing: patience. The emails had made it clear that James and Natalie were planning to wait about 6 months before going public with their relationship. I needed to let them proceed with their plan, let them think they had gotten away with everything, and then strike at the moment when they were most vulnerable. So I did something that went against every instinct. I pretended to be broken and defeated. I let my family and friends think I was barely coping. I talked about how devastated I was, how I didn't know if I would ever trust anyone again. And Natalie, playing her role perfectly, positioned herself as the supportive sister, helping me through my pain. "I'm so sorry you're going through this," she said during one of her support visits. "James is an idiot for letting you go. You deserve so much better." The irony was almost too much to bear, but I played along, letting her think her manipulation was working. Meanwhile, I was preparing. I was documenting everything, building my case, and waiting for the perfect moment to reveal the truth. That moment came 6 months after the breakup, when my parents called to announce a special family dinner at their house. The invitation had been vague but insistent. Everyone needed to be there for important news. I knew immediately what was coming. James and Natalie were ready to announce their relationship, believing enough time had passed that it wouldn't seem immediately suspicious. They probably thought I had moved on enough that I would be hurt but wouldn't make a scene. They had no idea what was about to hit them. The dinner was scheduled for a Saturday evening. I spent the entire day preparing, reviewing my evidence, and mentally rehearsing what I was going to say. Amy had offered to come with me for moral support, but I told her this was something I needed to do alone. "Call me the moment it's over," she said, hugging me tightly. I want to hear every detail of how you destroyed them. I arrived at my parents' house at exactly 6 o'clock, wearing a simple but elegant dress and carrying a leather portfolio that contained printed copies of selected emails, financial documents, and other evidence I had gathered. My parents, James and Natalie, were already in the living room, drinking wine and making small talk. The atmosphere was oddly festive, and I could see Natalie and James exchanging excited glances. "Diana," my mother said, standing to greet me, and I'm so glad you could make it. We have wonderful news to share. I can't wait to hear it, I replied, settling into an armchair and placing my portfolio on the coffee table in front of me. There was something in my tone, a calmness, a confidence that seemed to make Natalie nervous. She glanced at James, then at the portfolio, then back at me with a flicker of uncertainty. "Well," my father began, clearly uncomfortable, "Natalie and James have something they want to tell you." James and Natalie stood up, holding hands in a gesture that was clearly meant to demonstrate their unity. Natalie was practically glowing with triumph. "Diana," James began, "I know this is going to be difficult to hear, but Natalie and I have fallen in love. We didn't plan for this to happen. It just did, and we wanted you to hear it from us before anyone else." "We would never want to hurt you," Natalie added, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "But sometimes you can't. Help who you love. I hope you can be happy for us." The performance was remarkable. They actually seemed to believe they were the victims here, caught in an impossible situation by the unpredictable nature of love. "Wow," I said calmly. "That is quite an announcement." "We know it's a lot to process," James continued, "and we understand if you need time." "Oh, I've had time," I interrupted, opening my portfolio. 6 months, in fact. 6 months since you broke up with me 3 weeks before our wedding. 6 months since I found your laptop, James, with all those fascinating emails between you and my sister. The color drained from both their faces. My parents looked confused, glancing between me and the couple who were now frozen in horror. "What emails?" my mother asked. "The emails documenting their year-long affair," I replied, pulling out the first set of printouts and laying them on the coffee table where everyone could see. The emails where they discussed how James would marry me to get access to Grandma Rose's inheritance. The emails where they planned how to steal $8 million from me through strategic business investments that I would never be able to recover. I continued pulling out document after document, laying them out in chronological order. Here's the email where James explains community property laws and how he could legally claim half my inheritance if he married me and convinced me to invest it in his company. Here's the one where Natalie suggests breaking up with me right before the wedding to maximize my emotional devastation. And here's my personal favorite, the one where Natalie says she wants me to see you together because she wants me to know that she won. The silence in the room was deafening. My parents were staring at the documents in shock. James looked like he might be sick, and Natalie's triumphant expression had transformed into one of pure terror. "This is insane," James said, his voice weak. "Those emails are taken out of context. We never actually did anything, You didn't do anything because I found out before you could," I interrupted. "But intent matters, James. Intent definitely matters." I turned to my parents, who still seemed to be processing what they were seeing. "Did you know?" I asked them directly. "Did you know that your younger daughter was planning to help my fiancé steal my inheritance?" "Of course not," my mother said, looking genuinely horrified. "Natalie, tell me this isn't true." But Natalie couldn't speak. She was staring at the documents on the table, her face pale and her hands shaking. "It's all true," I continued. "Every word. James and Natalie have been having an affair since about 3 months after he proposed to me. They spent a year planning how to manipulate me into marrying him so he could get legal access to Grandma's money. And when he got cold feet about the plan, they decided to break up with me instead, timing it to cause maximum emotional damage. I pulled out one more document, my grandmother's trust documents, with all the new protections Jonathan and I had added. "But here's the thing about planning to steal someone's inheritance," I said. my voice growing stronger. It only works if the money is actually accessible. Grandma Rose left me $8 million in a trust that becomes fully available to me on my 30th birthday, which is next month. For the past 6 months, while you two were plotting and planning, I've been working with my attorney to make absolutely certain that trust is bulletproof. No spouse, no business partner, no family member can ever touch that money except me. I spread out the legal documents showing the additional protections. So, congratulations on your relationship, I said, looking directly at James and Natalie. I hope it was worth it, because you've successfully destroyed your reputations, damaged your relationships with your family, and accomplished absolutely nothing except exposing yourselves as the manipulative, greedy people you actually are. James tried one more time to salvage the situation. Diana, I know this looks bad, but you have to understand. I don't have to understand anything, I cut him off. I don't have to listen to your excuses or your justifications. What I have is evidence. Evidence that I've already shared with my attorney, with my financial advisor, and with several key people in our social and professional circles. That last part wasn't entirely true, but I wanted them to sweat. You were planning to steal from me, I continued. You were planning to use marriage as a tool of fraud. And Natalie, you were actively participating in a scheme to betray your own sister for money. Those are the facts, documented in your own words. I stood up, gathering my documents back into the portfolio. I've protected my inheritance. I've ended a relationship with someone who saw me as a target rather than a partner, and I've learned which of my family members I can actually trust, which, it turns out, is none of you except Grandma Rose, and she's gone. My mother finally found her voice. Diana, I had no idea. If I had known... But you didn't ask, did you? I said, looking at both my parents. When James broke up with me 3 weeks before the wedding, did you ask why? Did you question if something seemed wrong? Or did you just assume that I had somehow failed to keep him interested? The guilt on their faces told me everything I needed to know. You've spent my entire life treating Natalie like she was special and treating me like I was just dependable, I continued. Years of resentment finally finding voice. You gave her everything she wanted while expecting me to earn everything I got. And even now, even with proof that she tried to steal from me, you're looking at her with sympathy instead of anger. I saw it in their faces. They were already trying to rationalize Natalie's behavior, already searching for excuses that would let them forgive their golden child. I'm done, I said finally. I'm done being the responsible one while Natalie gets away with everything. I'm done accepting less because everyone assumes I don't need more, and I'm definitely done with this family. I walked toward the door, then turned back one more time. Oh, and James, your real estate development company is about to have some serious problems. Several of your investors have been made aware of your tendency to use romantic relationships as business strategies. I imagine they'll have questions about whether their investments are actually secure, or if they're also part of some elaborate con. This part was true. Jonathan had helped me identify several of James's investors who would be very interested to know that he had been planning to defraud his fiancée. A few well-placed anonymous emails had ensured that this information reached the right people. And Natalie, I added, looking at my sister one more time, enjoy your relationship. You two deserve each other. You really do. Then I walked out of my parents' house and drove away, leaving behind the family that had never valued me and the people who had tried to destroy me. The aftermath of that dinner was everything I had hoped for and more. Within days, the story of what James and Natalie had done had spread through our social and professional circles. I didn't have to say anything. The evidence spoke for itself, and enough people had seen it that the truth couldn't be contained or controlled. James's real estate development company quickly unraveled. Several major investors pulled their money, citing concerns about his character and judgment. Business partners began distancing themselves. Deals that had been in progress fell apart. Within 3 months, his company had folded, and he was facing multiple lawsuits from investors who felt they had been misled. Natalie fared only slightly better. She lost her job at the boutique where she had been working when her boss learned about what she had done. Her friends began avoiding her, Even our parents, while unwilling to completely cut her off, had significantly reduced their financial support and emotional validation. The relationship between James and Natalie lasted about 6 weeks after the dinner. Apparently, when there was no inheritance to steal and no elaborate scheme to execute, they discovered they didn't actually like each other very much. They broke up in a spectacular fight that became public gossip, with each of them blaming the other for the disaster their lives had become. I heard Natalie tried to call you, Amy told me about 2 months after the confrontation. She left you a voicemail, apologizing and asking to talk. I know, I replied. I deleted it without listening. As for my parents, they reached out several times trying to repair our relationship. They were genuinely shocked by what Natalie and James had planned, and I think they finally began to understand how their favoritism had contributed to Natalie's sense of entitlement. We never meant for things to be unfair, my father said during one of his attempts at reconciliation. We just thought you were strong enough not to need as much attention. That's exactly the problem, Dad, I replied. Being strong enough not to need something doesn't mean I didn't deserve it. Natalie got unlimited support and forgiveness because she demanded it. I got criticism and higher standards because I could handle it. That's not love, that's convenience. I maintained minimal contact with my parents for several months, responding to their messages but declining invitations to family gatherings. I needed space to process 31 years of being undervalued by the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. Meanwhile, my life was transforming in ways I never could have imagined. On my 30th birthday, I gained full access to my grandmother's inheritance, $8 million, carefully protected and impossible for anyone else to touch. But more than the money itself, I had something even more valuable. Freedom. Freedom to build the life I actually wanted rather than the one I thought I was supposed to have. Freedom to set boundaries with people who didn't value me. Freedom to recognize my own worth instead of waiting for others to validate it. I started by leaving the accounting firm where I had worked for 8 years. The job was stable and paid well, but it wasn't what I was passionate about. Using a portion of my inheritance, I enrolled in a graduate program in nonprofit management. I had always been interested in working with organizations that supported women and children, and now I had the financial freedom to pursue that interest without worrying about immediate income. This is amazing, Amy said when I told her about my plans. You're finally doing something for yourself. She was right. For the first time in my life, I was making choices based on what I wanted rather than what was expected of me or what seemed most responsible. I also bought a beautiful condo downtown, in a building with a view of the city and amenities I had never allowed myself to enjoy. It felt indulgent at first, but I realized I had spent 30 years living modestly while my sister lived extravagantly on our parents' money. I deserved to enjoy the inheritance I had actually earned through my relationship with Grandma Rose, but the most meaningful use of my inheritance was the foundation I established in my grandmother's name. The Rose Foster Foundation provided grants and support to women starting their own businesses, with a particular focus on women who had been underestimated or dismissed by their families. My grandmother believed in me when no one else did. I explained to the board of directors I assembled to oversee the foundation. I want to provide that same belief and support to other women who are told they're not good enough or that their dreams aren't realistic. The foundation's first grant went to a woman named Sophie Martinez, who was starting a tech company after years of being told by her family that she should focus on finding a husband instead of pursuing a career. Her pitch for funding had moved me to tears. Everyone in my life has treated my ambitions like they were cute hobbies, she said during her presentation. Like I was playing at being a businesswoman until I could settle down and do what women are supposed to do. Your grandmother's foundation is the first place that has taken me seriously. Watching Sophie's company grow and succeed over the following years became one of the most rewarding experiences of my life. The foundation helped dozens of women like her, providing not just money but validation and support that many of them had never received from their own families. About a year after the confrontation with my family, I received an unexpected visitor at my condo. It was Natalie, looking thinner and older than I remembered, with none of the confidence and sparkle that had always defined her. "I know I don't deserve your time," she said when I opened the door, "but I'm asking for 5 minutes to say something I should have said a long time ago." Against my better judgment, I let her in. We sat in my living room, and she began to speak. "I was wrong," she said simply, "about everything. The affair, the scheme, the way I treated you our entire lives. I was jealous of you, and I dealt with that jealousy by trying to take things from you rather than building my own life." "You were jealous of me?" I asked, genuinely surprised. "You were the golden child. You got everything you wanted." "I got things," she corrected. "Money, attention, forgiveness for bad behavior. But I didn't earn any of it. You earned everything you have, your education, your career, Grandma's respect and inheritance, and I resented you for it because I knew I could never compete with you on merit." It was the most honest thing Natalie had ever said to me, and I could see that the past year had genuinely changed her. "What happened after the dinner?" I asked. "Everything fell apart," she replied. "I lost my job, my friends, my relationship with James, which was never real anyway, just mutual greed and validation. Mom and Dad were devastated, not just by what I did, but by the fact that they finally had to see me clearly instead of through the filter of their favoritism." She paused, looking around my beautiful condo. "You built all of this," she said. "The foundation, this home, your new career. You took the worst betrayal and turned it into something positive. I spent the same year watching everything I thought I had just disappear, because none of it was real." "Why are you here, Natalie?" I asked. "To apologize," she said. "Not because I expect forgiveness or because I think we can have a relationship, but because you deserve to hear that I was wrong, that I'm sorry, and that I'm working on becoming someone who earns things instead of taking them." I studied her carefully, looking for signs of manipulation or insincerity, but all I saw was someone who had genuinely been humbled by the consequences of her actions. "I appreciate the apology," I said finally. "I really do, but I'm not ready to have you in my life. Maybe someday, but not now." "I understand," she replied, standing to leave. For what it's worth, I'm proud of what you've built. Grandma would be too." 2 years after the confrontation, I met someone new. His name was Eric Walker, and he was a professor of social work at the university where I was completing my graduate degree. He was kind, intelligent, and had spent his career working with underserved populations. He was also someone who genuinely valued the work I was doing with the foundation. "The fact that you turned your inheritance into a way to help other women instead of just living off it tells me everything I need to know about your character," he said on our third date. What I appreciated most about Eric was that he knew my entire story, the betrayal, the confrontation, the family dysfunction, and he didn't see it as baggage. He saw it as evidence of my strength and my refusal to be a victim. We dated for a year before getting engaged, and this time, the relationship felt completely different. There was no scheming, no hidden agendas, no sense that I was being valued for anything other than who I actually was. When Eric proposed, he did it in the garden at my grandmother's grave, where I went regularly to tell her about the foundation and the work we were doing. "I think she would have approved," he said, after I said yes. "She saw something special in you that your family missed. I'm grateful she protected you the way she did." We got married in a small ceremony with 50 guest people who genuinely loved and supported us, with no one there out of obligation or family pressure. My parents attended, and we had rebuilt a cautious but authentic relationship over the past 2 years. Natalie was not invited, and I felt no guilt about that decision. The wedding was beautiful and meaningful in ways my first planned wedding never could have been. It wasn't about impressing anyone or meeting expectations. It was simply about 2 people committing to build a life together based on mutual respect and genuine love. 3 years after the confrontation with James and Natalie, I stood in the office of the Rose Foster Foundation, looking at the wall where we displayed photos of the women we had helped. Over 70 businesses started, hundreds of jobs created, and countless lives changed because my grandmother had believed in me enough to leave me the resources to make a difference. Amy, who now served on the foundation's board, came up beside me. "Remember when you sat in that coffee shop 3 years ago while James broke up with you?" she said. "Remember how devastated you were?" "I remember feeling like my life was over," I replied. "And look at you now," she said, gesturing around the office and at the photos on the wall. "You're married to someone who actually deserves you. You're running a foundation that's changing lives. You've built exactly the life your grandmother hoped you would build." She was right. The betrayal that had seemed like the end of my life had actually been the beginning of it. James and Natalie had intended to destroy me, but instead they had freed me from a relationship and a family dynamic that had been holding me back my entire life. I heard through mutual acquaintances that James had left Portland and was trying to rebuild his career in another city. Natalie was working as a receptionist at a medical office, living in a small apartment, and reportedly much quieter and more humble than she had been before. My parents had adjusted their expectations for her and had stopped providing the unlimited financial support that had enabled her worst behaviors. I felt no satisfaction in their struggles, but I also felt no sympathy. They had made their choices and they were living with the consequences. Just as I was living with the consequences of my choices, the choice to document the betrayal, the choice to protect myself legally, the choice to walk away from people who didn't value me, and the choice to use my resources to help others. 5 years after the confrontation, I stood on a stage at a fundraising gala for the Rose Foster Foundation. We were celebrating our 5th anniversary and announcing that we had just awarded our 100th grant to a woman starting her own business. My grandmother left me an inheritance that changed my life. I told the audience of donors, supporters, and grant recipients. But more than the money, she left me something more valuable, the belief that I was capable of building something meaningful. The belief that my worth wasn't determined by how much attention I demanded or how well I met other people's expectations, but by what I actually accomplished and how I used my resources. I looked out at the audience and saw women whose lives had been changed by the foundation's support. I saw my parents, sitting together and looking at me with what seemed like genuine pride. I saw Amy, who had stood by me through everything, and I saw Eric, my husband and partner, beaming with pride. 7 years ago, I was betrayed by people I trusted. I continued. My fiancé and my sister plotted to steal my inheritance through an elaborate scheme that would have left me emotionally and financially devastated. When I discovered their plan, I had a choice. I could let that betrayal define me, or I could use it as motivation to build something better. I gestured to the photos displayed around the room, showing all the women the foundation had helped. I chose to build. And in building, I discovered that the best revenge isn't destroying the people who hurt you. It's succeeding so completely that their betrayal becomes irrelevant. It's using what they tried to take from you to create something they never could have imagined. The audience applauded, and as I looked around the room, I felt profound gratitude for the journey that had brought me to this moment. The betrayal that had seemed like the worst thing that could happen had actually been the catalyst for the best years of my life. The lesson I had learned, and the lesson I tried to pass on to everyone who came through our programs, was simple. Define success on your own terms, stay true to your values, and don't waste energy trying to prove yourself to people who have already decided you're not good enough. The right people will recognize your worth regardless of what you have or how you appear. And sometimes the most satisfying revenge against people who have judged and dismissed you is simply succeeding on your own terms and letting them realize they were wrong the entire time. If you're watching this and recognizing patterns from your own life, family members who undervalue you, relatives who try to take advantage of your success, people who make you feel like you're never good enough, I want you to know that their opinions don't define your worth. Build the life you want, not the life others expect you to have. Define success on your own terms. And don't waste time trying to prove yourself to people who have already decided you're not good enough. Sometimes the best revenge is simply living well and letting your success speak for itself. And if that success happens to come with a dramatic reveal that leaves your betrayers speechless, well, that's just a bonus. If this story resonated with you, please share it with someone who might need to hear that they don't have to accept being undervalued by their family. Drop a comment about your own experiences with family favoritism or sibling betrayal, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories about standing up for yourself and building an authentic life despite those who try to hold you back. Remember, you don't owe anyone access to your success just because they're family. Your worth isn't determined by their approval.